Hi, everyone. My name is Michelle Miller, and I am the CEO of ARINGO Americas. ARINGO is a global MBA admissions consulting firm. And as I said, I head up the Americas division. So after we go through the presentation today, if you'd like to reach out and you're based anywhere in North or South America, you will likely hear back directly from me. And I would love to hear from you. And for those of you in other parts of the world, my colleagues would love to hear from you too. So let's go ahead and get started. And by the way, just a quick technical note here. You'll notice we started a bit late today, and I appreciate your patience. And as a result of these technical issues, we're doing this a little bit blander than usual. As you can see, you'll be able to view all of my slides, and I apologize for that. But unfortunately, the full slide version is not working for some reason. So we'll just go slide by slide, and apologies that it's not as pretty as I would like. So let's jump in. I already told you all about myself. I live over in Portland, Oregon, and I've been with ARINGO for 4 years now, which the time really flies. My background is higher education administration. I've worked in university admissions related roles for, wow, 11 years now, if we include ARINGO. I hope no one's doing any math. And I'm also a PhD candidate for a doctorate in higher education administration. I'm currently finishing my dissertation. And so hopefully the next time you see me, I'll be Dr. Miller. So let's go ahead and jump in. So just a quick note about ARINGO. I know I mentioned a moment ago that we're a global company, but to date, we have helped over 4,000 applicants get into top MBA programs, as well as lesser known programs around the world. ARINGO is celebrating its 15th birthday, which is also so hard to believe, but it makes us one of the granddaddies in the MBA admissions world. So I'd encourage you to check us out a little further and see what it is that's led to the success. And as I mentioned, we'd be glad to tell you more about it personally if you'd like to reach out for a complimentary consultation. Now let's jump into what you actually came here to talk about, and that's how to get into these top schools. So I know this seems like a basic step, how you choose a school, but this is actually an important part of the process that you really do need to consider, because part of getting in is choosing the right program. Now, of course, we all hear about the big names, the Harvards, the Stanfords, etc. And these are excellent programs. However, it doesn't mean that it's going to be the right program for you. And if you apply it to Harvard simply because it's Harvard, or maybe your dad wants you to go to Harvard, I know there's somebody here that is nodding with me right now, it actually will show in your application if it isn't the right fit. So I encourage you to take the time to look beyond simple rankings. So there's a few other things to keep in mind. There's specialties. By the way, there's a ranking system for specialties as well. For example, did you know that Babson is #1 in entrepreneurship and has been for years? Michigan Ross is #1 for strategy, also has been for years. So these are things to keep in mind in addition to the overall ranking of the school. Location, believe it or not, is more important than you think. Now, I'm not simply referring to can you handle the winters in Connecticut, or how do you feel about pretty much all year round summer if you go to UCLA. It's also about finding jobs after you complete your degree in the location that you either would like to stay in, or probably an even better strategy, location of the jobs that you're going to be looking for. It stands to reason that even though with any top program, you can expect to see recruiters even from other parts of the country and even other parts of the world, you can also safely assume that companies that are in the backyard of some of these schools will definitely be showing up to recruit there. So something to keep in mind. We've already talked about ranking, and ranking is part of the process as well. I know at the very beginning I said, please don't focus all your energy on ranking, but it should be part of your consideration, because where the rankings go, the recruiters go. So that is something to consider. But down below here is where we get into the real meat of what I was bringing up at the beginning, which is that you need to find the school where you're going to fit in. There are some important ideas here, such as culture, teaching methods, class size, etc. I really like to point out teaching methods. I'll use HBS as an example again. Their famous or infamous, depending on how you feel about it, I say famous, case study approach in their classroom is excellent for some learners and not for others. So that's an excellent first step, by the way, if you're thinking about Harvard. Learn more about the case study method, whether you would appreciate it, whether it's going to help you get where you want to go. So just some quick logistical, oops, sorry, this is one of the problems with how I'm having to present today. Apologies again. So logistics information here. Most schools have 3 application rounds. When I say most schools, I'm referring to most of the top 10. There are a couple of notable exceptions that have 4 deadlines, or some schools also have an early admissions process, such as Columbia or Duke, which changes up their deadline process as well. But generally speaking, you can expect that there will be a first round in the fall, a second round in the winter, and a third in the spring. Or forgive me, switch up those seasons if you're below the equator. So only reason why I thought I would point this out is for candidates who are thinking of applying in the future, say next year, the year after, or even beyond. Kudos for planning ahead. Do plan on getting a head start. You'll notice that we emphasized here that you really should be writing your applications a good 4 to 5 months in advance. So for those of you applying this year, round 2, yes, you should already be working on your applications. And we'll talk more about that process. Speaking of getting started quickly, please don't wait until the last minute. And then here's just a quick list of, consider these at least the basics of what you're going to need in order to apply. Of course, you need a resume or CV. You're going to have essays, or depending on the program, they might call this statement of purpose. You'll need recommendations. We're going to talk more about those later. A GMAT or a GRE score, depending on where you are from, and a few other things it's worth looking into. If you grew up in a country other than the US, you may need a TOEFL score to prove English literacy and language skills. And then of course, there's going to be the application itself. You're going to need transcripts from your undergrad. And then here's some things that, frankly, really need to be done as well. Hopefully you have a solid GPA from before. Forgive me, you have some extracurricular activities. And of course, you should be very aware of what your goals are, both short-term, midterm, long-term, and you should be networking. And we're gonna talk more about each of these points in the best section of this presentation. 7 things you wanna know before you apply. I promise this is where the good stuff is in my presentation. So first things first, what are these schools looking for? This is probably the question I get asked the most, is how do I know what they're looking for? Now, every school is different. I will be talking a little bit more about that as well. But on a general scale, this pie chart shows a pretty good demonstration of what every school is going to want to know. What is your vision? What do your extracurriculars look like? Are you committed? Are you a leader? International exposure or outlook, very important, especially to some particular schools. So keep these things in mind when you're framing or making yourself a list of your qualifications and your goals, that this is what the schools are going to be looking for. And then you can narrow it down into what each school is specifically looking for. So going step by step here, starting with your resume. Again, very common question that I am asked is the best way to format your resume. Now, there's a lot of hot debate out there about whether it has to be the classic 1 page or if it can be multiple pages. I tend to err on the more conservative side and encourage you to get it down to 1 page. If you follow the steps here, you actually should be able to keep it within 1 page. But again, reach out to us, reach out to ARINGO if you could use some help with refining your resume, or if you do have a multiple page CV that you need help moving down into a 1 page business school resume, we'd be glad to help. But these points here are what I really want you to focus on. One, good company descriptions. I'll put a virtual asterisk next to that and tell you that this is especially important for international students or for applicants who work for lesser known or smaller companies. For example, last year, I remember one of my candidates from Brazil took the time on his application to, on his resume to explain that the media company he works for is similar in size to an American broadcasting company, or an Italian, the Italian equivalent to the American NSA. Was another candidate that I saw them write this on their resume. Just an example of how it helps to give them some insight into what the company does and what its impact is. It really will help you if you can explain how important the company is and what your role is there. Which brings me to this next part, impressive responsibilities. This is another part of a business school resume that's a little bit different than what you might be used to. Instead of simply listing your responsibilities or what you do day in and day out, begin with your with the accomplishments and the impressive responsibilities that you have. And by the way, I didn't write this on here, but please do take note, quantitative measurements are always helpful. If you can show that you implemented a policy that led to a 10% decrease in customer complaints or a 15% increase in profitability, anything that you can measure is always helpful, because then it makes it so much less subjective. You can actually show exactly how you impacted. Now, of course, highlight any honors or goals. Do not simply state the position. Do go into accomplishments, responsibilities. But I wanted to note here in the middle where we wrote connect to your goals. This is important. We call this the dotted line. Every candidate needs to be able to draw a dotted line from their past experience to their future goals. So earlier when we were talking a little bit about having those short-term, mid-term, and long-term goals in mind, your resume is part of that, because you need to be able to show how your future plans are related to your past experience, even if you're making a career change. That's very important. So something to keep in mind, you always want to be able to demonstrate that you have some experience, whether it be at work or in extracurriculars, that's preparing you for the future. Speaking of goals, this may seem a little bit simplistic, but this is an exercise that we have found has been truly helpful for candidates in trying to determine what their goals are. Because, by the way, if you've been sitting here today thinking, oh my gosh, I don't actually know what I want to do right out of business school, or I kind of have an idea, but I don't know what I ultimately want to do, that's okay. In fact, let me reassure you and tell you that you're normal. I speak to more people who are unsure than are sure. However, when it comes time to apply, you actually need to be able to present yourself as someone who definitely does have a plan and is able to share it. So in other words, this is where you should sit down and begin crafting out your goals, is at the beginning of your application process. And we recommend starting here. Dream big. Start with dream career. If you could do anything. What's that question? If you had $1 billion, what would you do? Start there. Start with your dream. And then you can begin to narrow it down like a funnel. Let it begin to narrow down into specific possible other directions. Then, remember what we were just talking about with resume? Make the connection to your history. Here's where you can make the case for why this degree is going to get you where you need to go. And then, speaking of that dotted line, you can show success. You can show how what you have been doing up until now, plus the MBA, is going to get you where you want to go. Networking. This is a common concern I hear from candidates, because, by the way, you should be applying to more than one school. So even if you are, for example, a legacy at Wharton and you know so many people there, you shouldn't only be applying to Wharton. You should be applying to other programs as well. And you need to be networking actively with each of them. As you can see, we're huge advocates of LinkedIn. But when I encourage you to use LinkedIn. I want you to know that I'm not simply saying that you should go and find some poor student and start hammering them with private messages. Instead, I recommend using LinkedIn to look for student clubs and organizations. You can even look for alumni networks from the school. That can be a great way to find people who have similar interests, and oftentimes there will be members of these clubs who have actually taken on ambassador roles and would be glad to answer your questions and tell you about a day in the life of. Some other ideas, you can write to professors with specific questions. Do go to MBA fairs, absolutely go to school info sessions. And then this at the bottom, visit campuses whenever possible. I want you to know that whenever I share this information, I'm mentally drawing a line through whenever possible. Just visit campuses. Quick story on this. Every year, I have at least a handful of candidates that ask me, Michelle, do I really need to visit the campus? It's far away. I'm not sure if I have the time to travel there. You know, Stanford isn't actually going to care if I'm there or not. You know, nobody's actually checking a box to see if I visited. I will agree that on the surface, those things are true, but there are two important facts. One, visiting the campus, you're going to get a feel for the culture that you just cannot get from afar. And then if you're rolling your eyes at me right now, and that's totally fine, and you, you still feel like you've met enough people, you've talked to enough people, you've gone to enough info sessions in your local city, you know this school. How about this scenario? How about the day that you go in to interview, and just in passing, the interviewer says, by the way, have you had a chance to visit the campus before now? I guarantee you, in that moment, every reason you had for not being on a visit is suddenly going to seem completely insignificant, and you will give anything to be able to say yes. So please do visit the campus. I promise it'll be worth it for more than just that reason, but if nothing else, please avoid my deer in headlights situation that I just shared with you. All right, moving on. How to approach your essays. Remember earlier we looked at that pie chart where we talked about how they're looking for your vision, your smarts, your motivation, extracurriculars. That's where you should start. Begin with a strategy. How do you want to present yourself as a well-rounded applicant? And then, this sounds so simple, but if I had a nickel, right? Make sure you're answering the questions. Too many candidates mistakenly use their essays as an opportunity to kind of broadcast this message, and then they realize that they haven't actually answered the question. So do make sure that while you are speaking to the important aspects of your candidacy and why you're a good fit for the school, that it relates to answering the question itself. If you have any uncertainty about whether or not you're doing this, give us a call. Glad to give you a complimentary consultation and see how we can help you. But moving back to this, let's see here. So connect your answers to your goals. We've talked a lot about that today. Stay modest, honest, and mature. At the bottom, you notice we quoted one of UC Berkeley Haas's values, which is confidence with humility, or you'll also hear them say confidence without arrogance. You want to be able to speak to your accomplishments without coming off as a jerk. And then last but not least, this is another one that I think we should underline. Be careful when you recycle your essays. Frankly, even saying that out loud, I want to just erase it or draw a line through it. Ideally, there shouldn't be a lot of material that's recycled. Yes, you are yourself. You shouldn't be a drastically different candidate at every school you apply to. However, each application, each essay really does need to be catered towards the school, their values, and how you fit with the culture. So there should be very little recycling. But I tell you what, if you're rolling your eyes at me, or if you have good intentions, but a few months from now you find yourself up against the deadline, please make sure that anything you are going to recycle, that you are being hawk-eyed about it, because how embarrassing would it be to tell Wharton why you're such a perfect fit for Haas. Recommendations. All right, this quote at the top, I laugh every time I see it. Other people do too. I hope someone out there is laughing, but I tell you what, that is a real quote that a candidate asked us once. So the answer to this question is actually not as easy as it might seem. Generally, the answer would be no, right? However, maybe you work for a family-based business and your mother is in charge. In that case, yes, you absolutely could use her as a recommender. Talk to me about some tips on how to balance that well. Now, most schools are going to ask you for 2 recommenders. And by the way, most schools prefer, and some of them will even specifically say, that they'd like your first recommender to be your direct supervisor. Now, if you're panicking, please don't. The business schools understand that there are many reasons why candidates cannot use their current supervisor. Maybe you don't want to rock the boat and let your employer know that you're considering leaving for 2 years. That's probably the most common reason, by the way. So if you are in that situation, then you should try to use a supervisor from a previous job. For your second recommender, I encourage you to be creative. Use somebody higher up at your company or higher up at your previous company, again, if the previous situation applies. This can also be a great time to use somebody from an extracurricular. What a great way to establish that you are a well-rounded applicant that's active in your community and that you've given back to that organization as well. However, whomever you choose, make sure that you strategize with them to determine which qualities you're having them emphasize. You want their letters to support your essays. And by the way, please do not make the mistake of simply asking your recommender to be a recommender and then sending them the link online and then assuming they have it from there. Do work closely with your recommender so that they understand which qualities you need them to speak to. Oh, last but not least, we have a note here about preferred work setting. Everything I just covered speaks to that. However, I will take a moment to say another common question I receive is, what about professors? Like your favorite professor from undergrad. 9.9 out of 10 times I'm going to tell you no, that would not be an appropriate recommender, because these schools really want to hear how you are as a worker, leader, employee, in other words, workplace, not academic setting. There is one exception. If you ever reported to your professor, for example, if you worked as a teacher's assistant, or let's say you worked in a lab on a project that the professor oversaw, in that case, you could, you could use them as a recommender because they did actually supervise your work. So just something to keep in mind. Extracurricular activities, I think we've talked a lot about this already today, but this is an important piece of the puzzle. In addition to everything that we write here, interests and benefit to your community, etc., all of those reasons are the best reasons. We should all be volunteering anyways, yes? But in addition to the fact that they do all these nice things for your profile, I want you to also keep in mind, especially those of you that come from well-represented populations, you know who you are, or if you feel like your profile is a bit traditional, an extracurricular activity can be a nice way to stand out from the pack. So please do get involved. However, when I say that, I'm speaking more to people that are applying next year or the year after. If you're getting ready to submit your application and you're not already actively involved in an extracurricular, please don't go join everything now. That's actually likely to backfire. And again, I'd be glad to talk with any of you in more detail about that issue later. Last but not least, online presence. I love this line because I think it says it all. Google yourself, your interviewer will. Now, we talk here about perfecting your LinkedIn profile, show your leadership, emphasize your strengths, show someone who's making an impact in their community. All of these things are important. But I also like to add a note here. Think about your other social media accounts too. Of course, we all have Facebook and Snapchat and all these fun social media accounts. And of course, those are meant to be more personal. However, I do think that this note about Googling yourself is a good reminder to make sure that anything that's going to come up, if someone Googles your name, is going to respect and back up what you want to convey to the schools. I often joke that maybe it's not so much about yourself, but maybe, you know, that old friend from high school putting something ridiculous on your Facebook account. So do be diligent about your online presence. All right, so who is next? I hope everybody in this conference is going to be applying with feeling a little bit more prepared after today. But as I've mentioned today several times, I know a shameless plug for ARINGO, but the reason I'm so passionate about it is because I love to help. Higher education is my thing, as I talked about earlier. So please don't hesitate to reach out and let's talk about your specific situation and how we might be able to help. Or if nothing else, I just enjoy meeting you and giving you my support support from Portland. All right, so let's see, that does it for the presentation. However, I'd like to go ahead and answer a few questions for those of you that have written them. Oh, you know, I think I'm flustered just because of my technical difficulties. I meant to tell you all at the very beginning that you're welcome to send in questions and I will answer them at the end. So just a moment here while I sorry, everyone. I'm having more technical difficulties, just so I'm in here. Okay, let's see here. Oh, I see there are a few people that weren't able to hear. I'm sorry, I hope you were able to get that to work. And let's see here. Oh, great question. Yes, you can. This presentation is going to be posted on Beat the GMAT afterwards. So yes, you will be able to view it. And I'm sorry, I don't know the technicalities, but I'm sure it will be posted. Let's see here. Oh, this is an excellent question. How to address a 4-month gap in my employment in the optional essay? Thanks for asking. So first thing I would say is that you should answer it honestly. So I have to admit that part of my answer, I could probably strengthen this answer if I knew a little bit more myself. But I would start with the truth. What were you doing during those 4 months? Hopefully you were still active in something. By the way, for those of you just being prepared in the future, this can be a good time to make sure that you are thinking ahead. Another great benefit of extracurriculars is that if you find yourself unemployed for a time, you know, that is something that will look nice on your resume. So I'm sorry, I know this isn't a very specific answer because I don't know what your situation is, but I would recommend that you address it candidly with what you were doing, and hopefully you did find some good ways to spend that time. Please don't hesitate to email me or reach out to us, and we'd be glad to elaborate on that further once we know more about your unique situation. Another great question, what is the one thing I should do to stand out for my application to Fuqua as an Indian applicant? You're probably all getting tired of me talking about extracurriculars, but this is one of the items I was referring to earlier when I talked about, you know, well-represented applicant pools and how extracurriculars can make you stand out. Setting that to the side, because you've all heard me harp enough on about extracurriculars today, honestly, I know this sounds a little simple, but I mean it. Be yourself. Speak to what you are passionate about, what drives you, you know, who you are as an individual. Because I tell you what, if nothing else, if nothing else I say today it is working for you, you can't change, you know, your background. Just like an investment banker, you know, you can't go back and change your work experience. It's okay to be a traditional applicant. You just need to show who you are as a person. Let's see. What are the prospects of being accepted if you have a score of 550? If you have a 550 GMAT, the first thing I would say is that the top 10 is probably not going to be a realistic goal for you. I'd highly recommend finding a solid GMAT tutor or course to bring up the score if you are indeed wanting to be competitive at a top 10. However, it's not simple enough to simply say, what is your GMAT score? The moment it is, I no longer have a job because frankly, these schools could save themselves an awful lot of time and money if they wanted to simply have a minimum GMAT score and that's it, right? So it really is about more factors than just your GMAT score. You might have an especially impressive accomplishment in work or in your personal life or an extracurricular that would lead them to look past the 550. But I'm here to tell you how to make your chances as strong as possible. So I'd highly recommend retaking the GMAT. Otherwise, there are several great schools out there whose GMAT ranges are not as high that you could be more competitive at. One moment, I see a few more questions. Oh, this is a great question. I've worked for a flat company for the past 3 years, and I'm afraid this will reflect negatively on my resume. Is there something I can do to make up for the lack of promotions that might stand out for other applicants? Thank you for asking this. I don't get this question enough, and I'm always happy to share. So flat organizations are actually becoming, that's becoming an increasingly popular way to structure organizations, especially smaller ones, startups, etc., almost always flat. So with that said, this is a good example of why company descriptions are important. So I would not hesitate to lay that out in your resume, that it is a flat organization. And then at that point, rather than focusing on titles, you can focus on responsibilities. Even though you haven't had a quote unquote formal promotion, you can demonstrate how you've taken on additional responsibility and what you've achieved during that time. So please don't let that stop you from applying. Which colleges should be preferred for an MBA in marketing? Marketing is always a popular field. Now, of course, I'm going to say Kellogg. They've been the gold standard for a long time. However, there are several other programs that also emphasize marketing and are recognized for it. UNC Keenan-Flagler is one I would recommend. But definitely look up specific rankings for specialties: marketing, finance, production operations, green energy, social impact. Do look up the rankings of the specializations, because you'll find a much broader array of schools to choose from if you look at it that way. What should be a target GMAT score for top 30 colleges? Again, it's not that easy, because other parts of your profile are going to weigh in here too. We estimate that your GMAT score has about 25% weight on your overall application. However, we've also shown that the strength of the applicant can change that, not to mention the score itself. For example, if you have a especially high score, like let's say a 770, or if you have a low score, like let's say your score is below 500, you can expect it to be more than 25% of the decision. So generally speaking, for a top 30 school, I would emphasize candidates shoot for at least a score in the upper 600s. But please don't take that as the written gospel and move on today. Please do know that there are other factors we need to take into consideration: your work experience, your GPA, where you went to school. There's so many other factors that they're going to be looking at. So by the way, please feel free to check out our chances calculator. It's free. Just go to aringo.com, and under free admissions tools, you'll see our admissions chances calculator. Excellent tool to play around with. You can plug in different GMAT scores to see how it impacts their overall competitiveness. But please do check that out. This could be a useful tool for some of these questions. What % of actual students in top 10 colleges take consultants' help? Thank you for asking. That's another question I wish I was asked more often. Admissions consulting is becoming increasingly the norm. Depending on who you ask and how they measured, et cetera, we've seen estimates that anywhere from 30 to 65% of top 10 applicants worked with an admissions consultant at least one point in their application process. So, you know, it's a difficult number to measure, given that, you know, many applicants are not forthcoming about whether or not they worked with a professional, but it is becoming more and more common, and I'd encourage you to check out why. All right, let's see here. I have time to answer 2 more questions. Let's see here. Oh, I love this question. Can an extracurricular be within the company, or does it have to be outside the company? Thank you for asking. It can absolutely be within the company. A few great examples that I've seen have been mentorships. That can be a great leadership role to speak to. Or if your organization has like a volunteering group. Back in the day, I don't want to admit how long ago, I worked for GE, and we used to go out and participate in local activities like cleaning up parks and building structures within the community. So anyway, absolutely within the company counts. Thank you so much for asking. Oh, which rankings to refer to? Such a good question. There are several, which is probably why you asked, several different ranking systems out there. I tend to follow what I think of as the big 3. I look at Business Week, I look at US News, and I also look at the Financial Times. Oh, but I'm sorry, I also have to put The Economist in there as another system that I frequently refer to. And then, in addition to looking at some of these specific resources, I encourage you to not just look at this year's ranking, but historical data, because you'll notice that there are some changes every year. For example, in the last 2 years, we saw both NYU Stern and Duke Fuqua land in numbers that were quite different than historically, which is why you really do want to look at the historical data, because it takes more than 1 year by one ranking system for it to have a strong influence over your decision and how competitive you will be in a school. Thanks for asking. And so I tell you what, I'm going to go ahead and answer one more question here. How to decide or shortlist which colleges to apply, and how many colleges should I apply in round 2? The second one, I'm not sure I'll be able to answer because I don't know a few other factors. Yeah, you know, sorry, I don't know how much time you have, how many you already applied to. You know, basically, the best answer I can give is that a lot of this will come down to gut feeling and knowing how much time you have to invest in the process. Because I don't want you to shoot for simple quantity. It's definitely a quality issue. If you only apply to 2 schools, but those are 2 awesome, well done applications versus 4 thrown together applications, I would choose at 2 every time. Then how to shortlist which colleges to apply. I'd go back to some of the information I shared at the beginning in terms of with, you know, fit at the school. You know, ideally, I would hope that no one would apply to a school that they don't feel they'd be a fit at. Any school you apply to, you should be doing so enthusiastically. So I would check out all the things we've talked about today: rankings, specialty rankings, culture, teaching methods, reach out to other students and find out what it's like there. But this is also something that will also come down to a little bit of gut decision after you've done your research. All right, everyone, that is my time for the day. Thank you so much for joining. This has been a pleasure, and thank you for the excellent questions. Apologies again for the technical issues, but it was real enjoyable answering these questions and sharing information with you today. Please check out aringo.com. Even if you decide that you don't want to actually speak with us, you won't hurt my feelings, but you can benefit from all of the free resources that we have, such as our chances calculator. For those of you that have interviews coming up, if you applied in round 1, we have great interview tips. For those of you applying in the future, we have free campus visit tips of how to make the most of your time on campus. So please don't hesitate to reach out and check out all these great materials we have for you. All right, everyone, we're going to go ahead and end the presentation now. Please have a great day and good luck. Bye-bye.